When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube, and welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing kind of a summary slash an analysis of Jaime Chapter 5 in A Storm of Swords. Now, most of you will know this chapter as kind of being the chapter where Jaime really kind of changes the character, right? So, all the way leading up to this chapter, he was merely looked at kind of as a villain or an anti-hero, right? We didn't really know Jaime's story. We didn't know really what made Jaime tick. Who was he? We really didn't know. He just came off as being a very arrogant, kind of cocky, and kind of a douche, almost, right? And this is the chapter where we kind of, learn how crazy Eris really was and what was really going on, within King's Landing during the later stages of, the Robert's Rebellion. So before we get into the video and get farther into this chapter, if you guys like to like, subscribe, and comment, please do. It helps the channel reach more people that might like this content as well. And let's continue on. Now, this chapter kind of starts with Jaime going into this bathhouse because they're supposed to have dinner with Lord Bolton. And he walks in, and Brienne's already in there, kind of doing her thing, scrubbing or whatever. And we see kind of Jaime already kind of struggling with kind of everything, right? This is a man that has always used his dominant hand, like a lot of people. Like me, I'm someone that is right-handed. Without my right hand, I would feel very lost. It's very difficult to do things. And in a time where being a swordsman was really what Jaime's biggest thing was, you definitely you feel the effects of Jaime not being able to do very simple things like undressing. He has to get the guards to basically help him undress to get into the bath. And what I think is interesting is that even though Jaime is kind of beaten down at this point and just in a very bad place, he still is kind of like, leave us, right? Commanding these people that really they don't really need to follow orders from Jaime. It's just, that thing where we talk about in real life where confidence is very key in a lot of things. That's kind of how this comes off as, is Jaime is very confident and kind of telling them to leave. And the other fact is, like, how are they going to escape, right? There's only one way into this bathhouse. You have Jaime, who's a cripple who can barely do anything by himself. And then, again, Brienne's, naked. She's unarmed as well. So they basically end up leaving the two alone. And Jaime goes into the the bathhouse or whatever. And he gets in, and he already is kind of starting to feel dizzy and stuff like that. I mean, again, he is still very weak at this point, as we'll see a little bit later on in the chapter. And Jaime, again, kind of starts out his normal way, right? He's kind of chastising Brienne, and eventually he kind of apologizes to Brienne, and kind of, they want a truce or whatever. And that's kind of where this chapter really starts to pick up, and where it really starts getting into the meat of the chapter. We have kind of this whole idea that Jaime says, let's put a truce on our fighting, or whatever. And Brienne goes, well, truce is built on trust. And why would I trust? And that's where she cuts her off and says, the Kingslayer? Well, and then he goes into this whole idea where, why is he named the Kingslayer? What's the story behind the Kingslayer? And he kind of talks about how Robert Baratheon was like, I've heard people are calling you the Kingslayer, just don't make a habit of it and joking about it. And that's kind of how the name kind of came about. And he starts to talk about how King Eris, was at the beginning stages of the Robert's Rebellion, didn't really take Robert seriously, right? He sends John Connington with his army to capture Robert and kind of put down the rebellion. And when that fails, right, and John Connington's army is kind of scattered, and John Connington is basically exiled, the next Hand of the King is made by, the Mad King. We see that Ares is kind of calling on a lot of these pyromancers, right? And he's starting to place caches of wildfire throughout King's Landing. And the new Hand of the King, Lord Chelstead, hope I'm saying that right, kind of starts to figure this out and looks to try to stop the Mad King, right? And all this ends up doing is nothing. King Ares is kind of set in his ways, and Lord Chelstead, it's a very weird name, ends up saying, okay, I'm done. Kind of in a scene very similar to Robert and Ned in the first book, where Ned kind of, puts down the hand of the kingpin, and Ares burns him alive and makes one of his pyromancers the new hand king. Now, all while this was going on, Varys was continuing to inform on people that were betraying Aerys, and Aerys kind of just became more and more paranoid because of this, as well as he was kind of starting to use Elia and her children as kind of hostages. And she tells, Prince Lewin Martell that, just remember, I have I have Elia here and I have her children, so better be loyal. And basically sends him off to get 10,000 Dornish forces. And also, he kind of recalls Rhaegar. He sends out 2 of the Kingsguard to go find him and kind of rally their host. And Rhaegar kind of insists on, hey, send a letter to Tywin and try to get him into the war, right? Because Tywin hadn't been doing anything, and he really doesn't respond to this anyway. But it was worth a try by Rhaegar and all that stuff. Now, Jaime also continues with saying that all while this was going on, he was just kind of sitting there, right? He was in the throne room guarding the king and all of his secrets and stuff like that. But after the Trident, Ares kind of sends away his wife, the queen, and sends Viserys away to Dragonstone. But he decides to keep Elia and her children in the Red Keep and all that, just kind of as an insurance policy that the Dornish would stay loyal, because he believed that there was no way Rhaegar could have lost, and that Lewin Martell must have betrayed him somehow. So that's kind of the big reason he does that. At this point, the wildfire is in place, and Aerys is known to say this to one of his pyromancers, that the traitors want my city, that I'll give them naught but ashes. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat. So this really kind of shows you where Ares' mindset was, and he really didn't care about the people. He just didn't want to give Robert the crown and all that. And we even, Jaime even goes into talking about how the Targaryens thought that fire was their friend, and that he kind of believed that Aerys didn't even think he was going to die, that he would be transformed into this great dragon that would defeat his enemies. And this is something that Aerion Brightflame had also thought, and he kind of makes that parallel. Now, when the Lannisters do arrive, this is the one time that Varys ends up not listening to, or not Varys, King Aerys ends up not listening to Varys. Now, very bad move. It's one of those things where I think the Mad King kind of was just hoping that he was going to get some good news and that Pycelle was right, even though Pycelle was unfortunately working for his own motivations, like Tywin, and also he was, a maester kind of guy, so getting the Targaryens out of power was a good thing. If you have not watched my Maester conspiracy type videos, I would watch those if you want to talk about more about what I'm saying with the whole Pycelle not liking the Targaryens and all that. I'd recommend that series, but I'm not going to talk about it too much in this video. But yeah, this ends up leading to the sack of King's Landing. Now, with this going on, Jaime is kind of the one that is left to kind of defend the Red Keep. And Jaime, knowing that they're not going to win, doesn't really go to the Mad King yet. He tells someone to say, hey, can we sue for peace? This is stupid. Why we shouldn't keep fighting this. And the Mad King kind of goes, bring me your father's head, or you're kind of a traitor. Now, you're kind of sitting in a very sticky situation if you're Jaime, because this is the big moral of the Jaime's story. Because there's so many vows built into his role right now, right? Should he be loyal to his father, to his house? Should he be loyal to his king? Should he do what's right? Should he do what's good? There's a lot of conflicting things going on, because Jaime sees this as, okay, right, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't make any sense to do it. And then also, he hears that one of the pyromancers is with the Mad King when this message was told to the person that ended up telling Jaime this news. And Jaime, knowing what's going to go on, says, okay, I'm not going to let this happen. He kills the pyromancer that had gotten the orders, which was Rosart. And then he kills the Mad King before he can tell anybody else to enact the orders to set the wildfire, on fire. And he also later killed the rest of them. And yeah, he did this more or less so the secrets would kind of die with him, so no one would know where the caches of wildfire were. But Brienne, kind of listening to this entire thing, just is kind of in shock. She doesn't say much, and when she does say something, she's like, "Why did no one ever really say this? Right? Why did you tell anybody?" And Jaime kind of, this is what kind of makes him angry, because he's just sitting here and going, I have to keep the secrets of the king, right? That's, my vows or whatever. But if he doesn't do that, he's going against vows and stuff like that. It's a really interesting concept that we continuously see through Jaime's point of view, is all these vows really conflict with each other, right? Because in reality, Jaime doesn't do anything wrong, but telling the king secrets is just as bad as doing things like killing him and stuff like that. And also that Ned would never have believed him, right? Ned always saw Jaime as this oathbreaker, this person, and it was kind of like he judged him guilty on the spot, right? You just see the whole situation, and Jaime is just not in a good predicament, and two, we just see that Ned didn't really trust the Lannisters because they came into the war so late, and kind of the actions they do in King's Landing, which we even see that Ned kind of gets in this conflict with Robert over, and why he ends up leaving to go do the Tower of Joy stuff. So I think it's interesting, this retelling of the story, because it's the first time really that we see the story from anyone else's point of view besides kind of like a Ned character. And it shows you a lot of what was going on, and it really helps you paint who Jaime is as a character. Now, he does end up passing out from the heat, and Brienne kind of calls for Qyburn. They question like what they've been feeding Jaime and stuff like that, but more or less what ends up happening is Qyburn's like, hey, Roose Bolton wants them at dinner. They need to be at dinner, no matter the circumstances. So Brienne kind of goes, okay, bring me clothes for him, and she ends up cleaning him. And that's where we head into the next big part of this chapter, which is going to be Roose Bolton and Jaime Lannister and Brienne of Tarth, that whole little dinner. So we get to this meeting with Roose Bolton and Jaime Lannister, and again, we see the difficulties Jaime is having, where, he asks for this wine, right? It's either red or white wine, and he goes red because of the Lannisters, which makes sense. But then when he actually gets the wine, we see again, he's not used to his right hand being cut off, and he almost knocks it over and has to use his left hand. And again, another great scene of showing Jaime still very not used to having only one hand, and something that's very realistic that would actually happen. Now, as this whole conversation starts, it's kind of a game they're playing, right? And Roose Bolton is kind of teetering around all of his options, kind of what he could do with Jaime. And Jaime was very blunt, right? He doesn't want to kind of have this dinner. He wants to know, what is the plan? What is Roose going to do with Jaime? What I think is really interesting about this scene, and shows how innocent Brienne is, and kind of how well she kind of fits the Stark mold of a character, where she really doesn't know what's going on in this entire conversation, right? Where Jaime is kind of picking up what Roose Bolton is saying. Brienne is just kind of sitting here kind of like, what's going on? And as they talk about what could happen with Jaime, we have a couple of kind of options, right? He could A, send him back to Robb and, cut his head off or all that. Either A, cut off Jaime's head kind of as like, oh, well, you did that to Ned. He could B, send Jaime back to Robb and at River Run and all of that, even though they're, headed for the twins. C, he could collect the ransom from the Karstarks, which again would remove, Jaime's head, but also will give him Alice Karstark to be wed to him. He would actually get Carhold if something was to happen to, Lord Karstark. Does end up happening. And if, his son ends up, dying, which conveniently the Karstark forces just went off somewhere else. So Alice Karstark is now the only real Karstark left, which kind of looks good in some people's eyes, right? But Roose doesn't do that. He marries Lady Walda and kind of says, screw that option. And another option he kind of considers, and is the one he goes with, is that he could send Jaime on. And this is an interesting one, but it comes with a dilemma, right? And this is kind of where he starts talking about the brave companions and Vargo Hoat, because Jaime doesn't really understand the full reasoning of why Vargo Hoat kind of took a Jaime's hand, and Roose kind of explains it. And this is kind of where we get a little bit more backstory on the brave companions and what's been going on in the war. Now, the brave companions are someone on the very beginning of this war. They start on Tywin's side, the sword company that he does end up buying, and they end up switching sides because Roose offers them Harrenhal. Now, this is something that Tywin was never going to give them, and they also, being kind of foreign and not knowing too much, didn't know that Harrenhal is kind of poisoned. So they kind of, seeing that, they also, with Stannis having more forces and about to take King's Landing, think, let's switch to Roose's side, thinking that A, they would get Harrenhal for kind of helping defeat the Lannisters, which again wouldn't have happened because Stannis would never have let them keep that, and all that. Now, once Stannis loses and that Tywin Lannister has more power than ever, well, Vargo Hoat's in a very bad situation along with the brave company, or the brave companions, because the only way that this goes well for them in this war is if Robb wins. And Robb is kind of losing the war. As we talk about, and something I kind of skimmed over in this chapter, is that we also hear that Robb has actually broken off his alliance with the Freys, basically by marrying Jane Westerling. And it's continued foreshadowing that we see Robb has really lost the war. Jaime instantly thinks that he won all of his victories, but he lost the battle in the bedchamber, or the war in the bedchamber. And Brienne sitting here being like, he would never do that, he's honorable or whatever. And it's like, just, Brienne, stop talking. And yeah, Lord Bolton's like, sit down and don't question my word again, which I think is very Tywin-esque, because I think the two characters are very similar in a lot of regards. And we continue on with how much power Robb is losing, how he's lost the Karstarks, he's lost the Freys, and continuing to lose all these forces, and that there's going to be this wedding, the twins. And we keep getting these subtle kind of foreshadowing that the Boltons really aren't for the Starks anymore. And again, with Brienne, she just really doesn't understand that. Right? She's like, so what's going to be done with, she kind of stands up and's like, what's going on or whatever. And Roose kind of goes, okay, this will make you feel better. I'm going to send Jaime on to King's Landing, but he kind of has to have this assurance from Jaime that Jaime kind of, clears Roose of any blame, the hand. And Jaime is like, yeah, I'll do whatever, just as long as you get me back to Cersei, which kind of still shows you his motivations there. And Brienne kind of sits down and goes, okay, that's good. Have we heard anything about, Arya or whatever? And Arya, this is kind of where that lie starts, right? It's kind of where the beginning of the Arya is in the Bolton's possession starts, kind of thing, with the Lannisters. When in reality, we know it's a lie, but this is where that kind of starts. And this kind of goes to Brienne's mind, like, okay, that's good. We already have one. And the chapter kind of ends with Roose going, yeah, we'll send you on, but Brienne has to stay. That Roose can't really rob Vargo Hoat of both of his prizes. And that also, there's the big reveal at the end for Jaime and also Brienne that Sansa has been married to Tyrion, so she doesn't need to be returned either. So that is how this chapter ends. Like I will say, this is definitely one of my favorite chapters, and it's a chapter that I really wanted to review for you guys because I think there's a lot going on. There's a lot of things that are, they establish in this chapter with Jaime's backstory. We have Jaime and Brienne's relationship kind of starting to get better. We get a lot of background information into Robert's Rebellion, one of the biggest events in the entire book series. And then we also, have Roose Bolton with his character and kind of talking about how a little bit of kind of foreshadowing to the Red Wedding and the betrayal of the Boltons really already happened. And we kind of see how Roose plays the game a bit better. And we kind of see these first inklings that maybe not the first inklings, but we see more ideas that Tywin kind of knows what he's doing, and he's playing this really well with the Bolton's phrase. So thank you guys for watching this video. And the next few videos doing about chapter reviews, I did a poll. If you guys would like to go back and vote on that poll, it's on the channel. Go to kind of the community stuff. And basically, I will be doing probably next week, I'm going to be doing a video on Renly's Peach and that whole chapter with Stannis and Renly. And I'm also going to be doing another chapter review next week, talking about the chapter before the Red Wedding, Catelyn's last chapter before that event, because I think it does such a fantastic job at setting the atmosphere and kind of the eerie feel of the twins and the kind of prelude to the Red Wedding. It's a very underrated chapter and one I really want to talk about. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this video. I really love doing these chapter review videos. So again, if there's a chapter you guys want me to talk about that I haven't put in that poll, or it's just an odd one that you guys want me to do, let me know down in the comments, and I do it as quick as I can. So bye guys, I'll see you in the next one.
If you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention.